The first time he mentioned the idea of the trip, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had remembered what it felt like when we used to dream together. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. His tone was too polished, too rehearsed. He painted the picture too perfectly, like someone describing a place they had never actually seen. He talked about a 2-week vacation that would change everything for us, a trip that would fix what was broken. And when he mentioned the price tag, it wasn't just a number, it was an anchor, $70,000. That number sat in my head like a ticking clock. I knew exactly where it came from. It wasn't a surprise windfall or some magical gift. It was the money we had set aside after selling the last piece of property from my late father's small estate. It was supposed to be our safety net. That money was the reason I had felt secure enough to imagine a future on my own if things fell apart. It wasn't meant to fund some grand promise. It was meant to protect me from exactly this kind of betrayal. We lived in Florida, where sunshine had a way of making things look softer than they were. Our house wasn't big, but it was ours. Or at least it used to feel that way. Lately, every corner of that house felt like it belonged to his lies more than to me. He talked about how the vacation would be a fresh start. I smiled and nodded because fighting at that moment would have meant nothing. He had already made up his mind. Or more accurately, he had already made his move. The day the money left our joint account, he kissed my forehead like everything was fine. I remember the way his hand lingered on my shoulder as if he wanted me to feel safe. But I wasn't safe, not anymore. When I checked the balance, the pit in my stomach became a canyon. $70,000. Gone. Not to a travel agency, not to a resort, not to anything that looked even remotely like a vacation. Just gone into his personal account like a whisper. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I didn't even cry. I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the bank statement glowing on my laptop screen. I traced my finger along the line where the transaction was recorded, like touching it would make it make sense. But it didn't. It only made me colder inside. That money had been my shield, my quiet promise to myself that I wouldn't be stuck forever. And now it was in his hands. I knew confronting him right away would be useless. He was a practiced liar. He'd twist the story, make himself the hero, and me the overreacting villain. He'd done it before on smaller things. This time I couldn't give him the chance, so I made a decision. I would act like I believed him. I would nod when he talked about the private villa in the Maldives. I would smile when he showed me fake screenshots he'd probably doctored himself. I would let him dig his own hole, one lie at a time. He started adding details to the story like ornaments on a fake tree. He said the resort had a floating breakfast. He said there would be private massages at sunset. He said the tickets would be delivered electronically, but there were delays, always delays. Every time I asked for proof, there was a new excuse. I didn't push too hard because I wanted him to keep talking. People like him always talk too much when they think they're winning. I spent quiet nights planning. I opened a hidden folder on my laptop and began saving everything. Screenshots of the missing transaction, copies of our bank statements, the fake resort names he dropped so casually. I checked those names online, but none of them existed. No hotels, no villas, not even some obscure travel listings. Just empty words. I kept a notebook too, writing down dates, times, and every detail he gave me. If he wanted to build a lie, I would build a wall around it. I remembered the first time I thought about leaving him. It wasn't because of something loud or explosive. It was a quiet evening when I realized my heart didn't feel safe around him anymore. He used to make promises and keep them, but over time those promises became tools, little manipulations disguised as love, and I let them slide because I thought love meant patience, but this time patience wasn't love. Patience would have cost me everything. I told no one, not friends, not family, not even the one person who would have listened without judgment, because I needed silence. Silence gave me control. Silence gave me time, and time would become my greatest weapon. I smiled when he spoke about the trip because every fake smile bought me another day to prepare. One night, after he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise. I wouldn't just catch him. I would make sure I never had to depend on him again. I would use his own lie to free myself. If he wanted to use $70,000 to build a fantasy, then I would use that same $70,000 to build my escape. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because this wasn't just a careless mistake. This was a betrayal so calculated and so cold that it forced me to choose between staying broken or walking away for good. I watched him in the morning as he sipped his coffee, talking like a man who thought the world belonged to him. He didn't know that every lie he told me was becoming a brick in the foundation of my escape. He didn't know I had already started digging under his words, searching for the truth he thought he'd buried deep. I started to memorize everything, the dates, the way his voice changed when I asked about the tickets, the shift in his eyes when I mentioned my excitement about the resort. He had no idea how transparent he was becoming. Lies have a way of unraveling slowly at first, then all at once. Every day I found a new thread, a missing email, an unaccounted for withdrawal, a phone call he took in the garage, a text message he tried to hide. It was like watching a puzzle complete itself without having to force the pieces. I didn't need to push him. He was doing all the work for me. The more I watched, the calmer I became. Not the kind of calm that comes from peace. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold the final card. He didn't know it yet, but the lie he thought made him untouchable was the same one that would leave him exposed and powerless. I decided I would not only leave him, I would take back control of the very thing he tried to steal from me, my security, my dignity, my freedom. And it all started with $70,000 and a vacation that never existed. I started to notice how the lie had made him careless. It was like watching someone perform a magic trick they were too proud of. He moved through our days with this strange, smug ease, talking about flight times, luggage, and itineraries like everything was already set in stone. I let him talk. I never corrected him, never challenged the details, never pointed out how certain things didn't line up. I wanted him to feel untouchable. People like him get bolder when they think they're winning, and the bolder he got, the easier it became to follow the trail he was leaving behind. When I checked our accounts again, I noticed something he clearly didn't expect me to see. The $70,000 hadn't just disappeared into some vague holding pattern. It had moved through a series of smaller transfers, split into different amounts, then shuffled into places I didn't recognize. I traced each one carefully. It wasn't fast, but it was deliberate. He wasn't hiding it in one place. He was spreading it out like someone who had done this before. That realization chilled me. It wasn't just about a vacation anymore. It was about control. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to know that I had no way out. He must have thought that if I didn't have that safety net, I would never find the courage to leave. He didn't know that taking it would only give me more clarity than I'd ever had. Every night after he fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my notebook in hand. I'd follow the digital breadcrumbs like a map. He wasn't smart enough to cover every track, and I wasn't too naive to believe a story that had holes as wide as the ocean. One of the accounts he transferred the money to wasn't even in his name. It belonged to someone else entirely. At that moment, a small voice inside me whispered what I had been trying to ignore. This wasn't just about lying to me. It was about building a future that didn't include me at all. I remembered how, months earlier, I had started to drift away from him emotionally, not because of a single event, but because of years of quiet disappointments that had chipped away at the trust I once held so tightly. Every promise he made and broke became another crack in something I thought was solid. I had spent too long pretending it wasn't happening, but watching the money disappear, seeing the careful way he plotted his story, showed me something I couldn't unsee. The house felt different. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I walked through each room like I was cataloging my life, wondering how much of it was mine and how much of it was a performance. I ran my hand over the couch we picked out together, the framed photos that lined the hallway, the kitchen table where we had talked about dreams that were no longer real. It all felt staged now, like a set for a life that had already ended without me noticing. He began planning every little detail of the so-called trip, claiming he wanted everything to be perfect. I smiled and played along. I told myself that every fake plan he made was just another piece of evidence falling into place. He was building a house of cards, and I was standing quietly waiting for the breeze. I started to prepare in silence. I gathered bank statements. I backed up every piece of correspondence. I created a timeline that showed exactly when the money left, where it went, and how he changed his story each time I asked a gentle question. I didn't need confrontation. I needed proof. I needed a clean line that led straight back to him with no room for denial. Some nights I'd lie awake, listening to him snore beside me, and I'd imagine a different kind of silence, one where I didn't have to measure my breathing around his mood, one where I didn't have to hide my strength just to keep the peace, one where I could rebuild from the ground up without someone standing in the way. I thought about how much time I had wasted trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. He had always been good at talking about the future, but terrible at showing up in the present. He had this way of spinning big dreams like silk, wrapping them around me until I believed I was safe. But silk can strangle just as easily as it can hold. The first time I saw the fake resort confirmation, I almost laughed. It was so lazy. A generic email with a fake logo and a spelling error in the name of the island. I saved it in my hidden folder like everything else. If he was going to underestimate me, I would use that to my advantage. He thought he was playing a game he had already won, but the real game was happening quietly, right under his nose. One afternoon, he talked for an hour about all the things we'd do on the trip. He described how the air would smell, how the water would sparkle, how I'd never forget it. I nodded, smiled, and let him believe I was enchanted. But inside, I was counting down, not to a trip, but to the moment he'd realize everything he built was about to collapse. The money was the trigger, but it wasn't the only thing he took from me. He had taken trust. He had taken the version of myself that believed in promises without proof. But what he didn't know was that in trying to take everything, he had also given me something back. A reason. A very clear, sharp reason to walk away without looking back. As the days passed, I felt less like the person who used to beg for scraps of honesty and more like someone standing in the middle of a storm with both eyes open. The lie was still growing, but so was my resolve. He didn't see it because he wasn't looking. People who lie like he did never expect their victims to be patient. I decided I wouldn't be the one begging for an explanation. I would be the one holding the final truth. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just leave. I would leave with everything I needed to never have to turn back. The lie was supposed to make me dependent on him. Instead, it was setting me free, and he had no idea. The night before, he was supposed to book the flight. I stood at the sink, hands under warm water, staring at my own reflection in the kitchen window. I could see him on the couch behind me, laughing at some show he wasn't even paying attention to. It was such an ordinary scene, but everything about it felt staged, like we were actors trapped in a scene that had already played out too many times. I dried my hands slowly, letting the silence stretch. I had learned that silence could be a weapon. It made him uncomfortable. When I stopped asking questions, he filled the space with lies. It was almost too easy. "Babe, do you want window or aisle?" He called out casually, as if this was real, as if we were actually going somewhere together. "Window," I said softly, playing my part. He grinned, proud of himself, thinking he was winning, but I could see it now. The small inconsistencies he probably thought I'd never notice. The way he avoided specifics about the airline, how the itinerary was always coming tomorrow, how every conversation about the money was wrapped in vague promises instead of actual facts. After he went to bed, I opened my hidden folder again. The screenshots, the transaction logs, the bank trails, all neatly lined up like puzzle pieces waiting to lock into place. My notebook was getting full. I wrote down the time he booked the flight, the card he supposedly used, the amount he claimed, the number he invented. The story he told me didn't match the records. It never had. And the truth was, I wasn't scared anymore. I was sharpening myself on his lies. The next day, he started talking about travel insurance. He spun a story about a policy he just got approved for. I let him talk, even asked him questions like, I cared. "Oh, what kind of coverage? Did they email it to you? When does it start?" Each question was a soft nudge, and each answer another loose thread. I tugged at them slowly, carefully, until the entire thing started to unravel in my hands. He wasn't careful anymore. That's the thing about people who lie. When they believe they've convinced you, they start getting sloppy. They start underestimating you. I spent the afternoon in the small cafe down the street, a place he never bothered to remember. It was quiet there, just me, my laptop, and the hum of the espresso machine. I traced another transfer, smaller this time, $3,200, moved to an account I hadn't noticed before. It was buried deep beneath a name I didn't recognize. I copied it down. That account was the crack in his wall. I sat there for a long time, sipping coffee that had gone cold, realizing something that both steadied and terrified me. This wasn't just a man lying to his partner. This was a man who had been preparing for a life without me, a future where I was just an obstacle he had already planned around. When I got home, the house smelled like the dinner he ordered in, pretending to cook. He greeted me with a kiss, like everything was normal, like he wasn't building his escape route one fake reservation at a time. I smiled back. I had become good at smiling without feeling. He sat across from me, talking about sunrises and snorkeling and how I'd love the water there. I nodded and tucked another detail away. Every time he talked, he left pieces of the truth exposed like breadcrumbs. That night, as I lay beside him, I stared at the ceiling and felt something shift inside me. I had spent months, maybe years, shrinking myself to fit into his narrative. I had apologized for things I didn't do, carried guilt that wasn't mine, believed stories that didn't add up because I was too tired to keep fighting. But now I was awake. The money was never just money. It was a mirror. It showed me exactly who he was and exactly who I had become while loving him. I turned onto my side and looked at his face in the dark. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid to lose him. I felt ready. Ready in a way I hadn't been in a long time. He thought he was leading this story. He thought I was just following along. But the thing about pretending to be blind is eventually you open your eyes. And when I did, I saw everything. I remember the first time I realized something wasn't right. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was a small thing, almost too quiet to matter. He said he'd booked the flights to the Maldives, and when I asked for the itinerary so I could pick my seat, he brushed it off. He told me it was all digital, that he'd handle everything, that I didn't need to worry about the details. At first, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But small cracks grow fast when you're paying attention. He said we were staying at a luxury villa on the water. I searched the name he gave me and nothing came up. No website. No listing, no photos. It was as if the place didn't exist. I asked again casually and he laughed it off like I was overthinking. I told myself maybe it was a new resort. I told myself maybe he wanted it to be a surprise. But deep down, something cold began to crawl into my chest. The money was gone from the account a week after he'd said he needed it for the trip. $70,000. He said the package required full payment up front to get the private villa. That kind of money wasn't just lying around. It came from our savings account, the one we built together over years. It was supposed to be our future, our emergency fund, our safety net. For the first few weeks, he fed me details. A yacht cruise, a sunset dinner, excursions on private islands. But every time I asked to see the confirmations, there was an excuse. The travel agent was slow. The system was down. The itinerary was under review. I pretended to believe him. I nodded. I smiled. I made him think I was the same trusting woman I used to be. At night, when he fell asleep, I opened the laptop. I checked every travel site I could find. No record of any booking under our names. No sign of any charge from a travel agency. Nothing. It was like the trip lived only in his mouth. That was the moment I stopped being the woman he thought I was. I became someone quiet, someone calculating, someone who wanted to know the truth without tipping him off. I started keeping notes, dates, amounts, his exact words. I wrote down everything, even the way he smiled when he lied. He grew bolder with each day, thinking I was still in the dark. He started talking about what he'd pack. He showed me fake weather forecasts. He told his friends about our upcoming trip. He wanted me to be trapped in the image he built. I found the first real clue 2 months in, a single transaction buried in the bank statement. It wasn't labeled as travel. It wasn't labeled as anything close. It was a transfer to an unfamiliar account, not a company, not a hotel, just a name, a woman's name I had never heard before. My hands went cold when I saw it. The money hadn't gone to any resort. It had gone to her. I didn't confront him. I couldn't. If I did, I'd lose my chance to build something stronger than a fight. I needed proof that could break him cleanly, legally, completely. I called the bank the next day. I told them I wanted details on the transaction. They hesitated at first, but it was a joint account. I had the right to know. What they gave me made my stomach tighten. The account was based in Florida, a personal account, not business, not travel. That was when I started the real investigation. Quietly, carefully. I hired a private investigator with the excuse of needing help locating financial inconsistencies. I gave him the transaction history, the date, the name. I watched him work while pretending to still believe in this dream trip. While he spent evenings describing the turquoise water and white sand, the investigator traced the money trail. It wasn't hard. He had been sloppy, arrogant. He had transferred the funds to a woman he'd been seeing for almost a year. She wasn't some random stranger. She lived less than 2 hours away. I learned more in the next 3 weeks than I had in the last year of our marriage. He'd promised her things, a house, a future. He'd used our savings as the foundation for his double life. I saw the photos. I saw the messages. The same words he once said to me were now recycled for someone else. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something sharper than heartbreak. I felt clarity. That $70,000 wasn't just money. It was my exit. It was the key I needed to finally end the slow death of our marriage. While he crafted fake itineraries, I crafted legal plans. I visited a lawyer. I brought every document I had. The lawyer didn't even blink. He told me financial fraud like this was powerful leverage. If I played it right, I could walk away with more than I thought possible. The lawyer told me to keep collecting. So I did. Every transaction, every fake hotel name, every excuse. I started recording dates when he lied. I archived emails. I built a timeline so tight it would choke any defense he tried to make. He thought he controlled the narrative. But every night while he talked about palm trees, I sharpened the knife of truth. The day he told me the tickets were confirmed, I smiled. I asked what time we'd fly. He said not to worry. He had everything covered. I already knew there were no tickets. There never were. That night, I downloaded the last batch of bank records and sent them to my lawyer. A week later, I had enough to prove everything. The trail of the $70,000 was clear. He transferred the money to the woman. He bought her a down payment on a house that wasn't in my name, a house that wasn't for me. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the printed papers. That money was supposed to be our future. Instead, it was now the very thing that would free me from him. I didn't sleep much after I found out where the money had gone. My mind was too loud. I replayed every moment in my head. The way he had smiled when he asked for the money. The way he held my hand like we were a team. The way he made it sound like a once-in-a-lifetime trip that would fix everything. That was the part that stung the most. He had wrapped his betrayal in something soft, something beautiful, something that I wanted to believe in. I started to view him differently after that night. When he talked about the trip, I didn't see my husband. I saw a man lying through his teeth, weaving a fantasy while spending my trust like cash. Every new fake detail he fed me became another thread in the web he didn't realize I was already tearing apart. The investigator worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he handed me a small, neatly organized folder. Inside were printouts, photos, and bank statements. He had tracked down the property records. The down payment he made with the $70,000 was for a small house in Tampa, Florida. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to set up a future with someone else. I stared at the address, the date of purchase, and the amount. It all matched. The lie was no longer invisible. It was documented, signed, filed, real. The woman's name appeared again and again on the documents. She wasn't just a fling. She was part of a plan. He had built a second life in a quiet corner of Florida where he thought I'd never look. He had spent months preparing for it. While I thought we were planning a vacation, he was building a home with someone else. I felt something change inside me. There was no heartbreak left, no begging, no sadness, just a sharp, focused calm. This wasn't about saving a marriage anymore. This was about saving myself. I started moving with intention. I opened a new bank account in my name only. I transferred small amounts from our joint account each week, just enough to avoid raising suspicion. I started sorting through our joint assets, our house, our car, the accounts that had my name attached to them. I began separating my life from his without him ever noticing. Every lie he told me became another piece of leverage. Every excuse he made was another page in my growing file. My lawyer advised me to wait, to let him keep lying. The longer he kept the act going, the stronger my case would become. It wasn't easy to sit across from him and pretend everything was fine, but I did it. I became an actress in my own marriage, rehearsing smiles I no longer meant. I started setting digital traps, small ways to confirm his lies. I signed up for travel alerts with my email. I checked flight bookings. I checked resort listings. I even called a fake travel agency number to see if he'd give me a name. He did. It was a resort that didn't exist. I noted the exact spelling, the date, the time he said it. Another entry in my growing evidence log. His confidence only made it easier. He thought I was still the woman who trusted him without question. He thought he had all the power. That made him sloppy. He started leaving his laptop unlocked. He started taking calls in the next room, but didn't lower his voice. I learned more than he could have imagined just by listening. One night while he showered, I opened his email. He didn't even bother to change his passwords. There it was, a string of messages to the woman. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He talked about their future in Tampa. He promised her things he'd once promised me. He told her about the house, about how everything was set, about how soon they'd be together. He had no idea that every single message was being printed, logged, and filed away neatly. The investigator found photos next. They weren't scandalous. They were worse. They were ordinary. Pictures of them at a small restaurant. Pictures of them walking on the beach. Pictures of them sitting on the porch of the house he bought with our money. Those photos showed something steady, something planned. I looked at them without crying. I thought I would break, but I didn't. I felt steady, like I was finally standing on the ground after years of floating in uncertainty. The lawyer and I met again. He explained how Florida law worked when it came to marital assets and financial fraud. Since the money was taken without my knowledge or consent for personal use outside the marriage, it could be used as grounds for a very favorable divorce settlement. That meant the house he bought in Tampa, the accounts in his name, everything he thought he'd built behind my back could be turned into my leverage. He thought he was setting himself up for a new beginning. What he didn't know was that he had just funded mine. The next part required silence. I stopped asking questions. I stopped showing curiosity about the trip. I let him feel safe. I let him believe I was excited. I even bought a suitcase. I wanted him to think he had fooled me completely. Behind that mask, I worked. I made copies of every financial record. I took photos of his credit card bills. I backed up his emails. I pulled utility bills for the Tampa house. I even printed out the property deed that had his name and the woman's name side by side. Every line of ink was another nail in the coffin of his lie. One night when he was out, I went to the house safe. I knew the code. It had never changed. Inside were more papers, bank slips, insurance forms, and a spare set of keys. Among them, I found the final piece I didn't even realize I was missing, the signed transfer document of the $70,000. It had both our names on it. He had forged my signature. That moment was cold and clear. He hadn't just lied to me. He had committed fraud in my name. I scanned the document, sent it to my lawyer, and locked everything back in place as if I had never touched it. The lawyer said this changed everything. With a forged signature, the leverage wasn't just strong, it was ironclad. The days started to feel longer after that. I walked around the house, smiling like I always had, but I was counting down the minutes. He was celebrating in his own way, talking about how this trip would be the best thing that ever happened to us. I listened, nodding at the man who didn't realize he was building his own trap. Each morning I added one more piece to the puzzle. Bank records, statements, screenshots, photos. He wasn't just lying to me anymore. He was lying to himself. The deeper I got into the evidence, the quieter everything felt. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with peace. It was the kind that comes when something big is about to break. He walked around the house like nothing had changed. He still talked about the imaginary flights, the imaginary resort, the imaginary meals we would have on a white sand beach. I let him talk. I smiled when he smiled. I even packed sunscreen in a small bag just to make it look real. Inside, I was already gone. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his shadow, following every move he made, collecting everything he left behind. I started working with my lawyer more closely. He explained how we could use everything I gathered to file for divorce in a way that would protect me and give me the upper hand. The forged signature made it clear this wasn't just a lie, it was fraud, and fraud changed everything. It meant I could freeze accounts, file for an emergency hearing, and demand restitution. It meant he would lose the house in Tampa before he even knew I knew it existed. Every night, after he fell asleep, I would sit in the living room with my laptop, organizing the evidence into folders. Bank records went in one folder, photos in another, emails in a third. The forged documents got their own special place. It became my ritual. I felt myself getting stronger each time I added a new file. Meanwhile, he grew bolder. He stopped hiding his late-night calls. He started making plans right in front of me. He thought I was clueless. He even told me to pack more clothes for the trip. I nodded, keeping my expression soft, like I still believed. One afternoon, I followed him. I had never done that before. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would give me away. He drove across town to a small cafe. She was there, the woman. I watched them from the car, the way he leaned toward her, the way they laughed. It wasn't an affair built on excitement. It was steady, like they had been planning something for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I took photos. Then I drove away. That night, when he came home smelling like coffee, I didn't ask a single question. I handed him dinner like everything was fine. He had no idea that while he was eating, my lawyer was reviewing the time-stamped photos I had just taken. The next step was securing my own finances. I had already opened a new account. Now I started moving bigger amounts. I made sure everything was legal, clean, traceable. The lawyer had warned me to be smart. If I moved too fast, he might notice and get suspicious. So I took it step by step. I also changed the passwords on everything that was mine alone. My phone, my email, my credit cards. I took my name off accounts that tied me to him. I updated my emergency contacts, listed my lawyer as a backup, and made sure that if anything went wrong, he wouldn't have access to me. Then came the trip date. He told me everything was booked. He said we'd be leaving in 2 weeks. He even made up flight numbers. But when I checked them, they didn't exist. It was almost laughable how easy it was to prove he was lying. I knew that was the perfect moment to act. I met my lawyer the next morning. We sat in his quiet office with all my evidence spread out on the table. He told me it was one of the cleanest cases he had seen in a long time. He said we could file for divorce and include the fraud claim. He explained how quickly the judge would sign the temporary restraining order, freezing any assets he tried to touch. I felt calm. My hands didn't shake anymore. I wasn't scared. I was ready. The legal preparation began. We drafted the divorce petition. We attached every piece of proof I had: the house deed in Tampa, the bank transfers, the forged signature, the fake flight details, the emails, the photos of him with the woman. Everything was organized, clear, and undeniable. The lawyer explained how we'd serve him. It had to be timed carefully. If we moved too early, he might try to move or hide the money. If we waited too long, he could make a sudden withdrawal. We had to strike when he felt the most secure. That would be right before the fake trip. I couldn't sleep that night, but it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was anticipation. I started rehearsing how I'd act around him until the day came. I couldn't give him a single hint. I laughed when he laughed. I made plans for the trip with him. I asked what clothes to bring. He loved that. He thought it meant he had me wrapped around his finger again. Each fake smile I gave him was a step closer to my freedom. The first real cracks in his mask showed up on a Thursday morning right after sunrise. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table with nothing but a cold cup of coffee in my thoughts. I could hear his footsteps upstairs, that familiar rhythm that used to mean safety. Now it sounded like warning bells. He came down dressed too sharply for a casual business meeting. A fresh suit, polished shoes, that same cologne he only wore when he wanted to impress someone who wasn't me. "Big day?" I asked lightly, pretending to scroll through my phone. He smirked. "You could say that." That smirk used to charm me. Now it just confirmed everything I'd been piecing together in the shadows. The late-night calls, the secret account, the Tampa property under a name that wasn't mine. For weeks I'd been walking a tightrope between pretending and planning. I waited until he left, closing the door with that easy confidence of a man who believed he was still in control. The moment I heard the car pull out of the driveway, I exhaled. My hands didn't shake this time. I grabbed the folder from the bottom drawer, one I'd labeled in the smallest, neatest handwriting, Plan B. My lawyer met me downtown. The paperwork was already prepared. Dates, signatures, evidence, clean, precise, bulletproof. I'd spent too many nights making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. The moment the pen hit the page, something inside me settled. This wasn't just about catching him in his lies. It was about reclaiming my ground. We filed for the injunction first, freezing joint accounts, flagging property transfers, locking everything down before he even had a chance to move. A quiet, strategic strike. By the time he realized what was happening, the damage would already be done. Back home, I moved through the house with a strange kind of calm. I packed only the essentials, a few clothes, documents, a photo of my mother. Every object I touched felt different now, like I was seeing the life I'd built with him through clear glass for the first time, not through the fog of excuses and almost believed lies. When his car returned that night, I was ready. Not with a fight, not with tears, just a quiet resolve. He walked in all confident, laughing at some message on his phone. The second he saw my face, the smile faltered. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "Nothing yet," I said evenly. He narrowed his eyes, trying to read me, the way he always did when he thought he could manipulate the silence to his favor. But this time, the silence belonged to me. The next morning, the process server was already waiting at the end of the driveway. A tall man in a crisp shirt, holding a thick envelope. I timed everything carefully. He walked out the door, humming under his breath, still living in the world he thought he controlled. "Mr. Alvarez." He stopped mid-step. "Yeah?" The man handed him the envelope. "You've been served." The words didn't echo. They sliced. I watched from the window as his entire face shifted. Shock first, then anger, then the desperate flicker of someone realizing they're no longer holding the strings. He opened the first page, then the second. Then he looked at the house like it had betrayed him too. I opened the door slowly, leaning on the frame. "Good morning," I said softly. "You—" he started, voice rough and low. "Me," I cut in, steady. He threw the papers against the porch rail, but the law doesn't shatter just because someone gets angry. The accounts were frozen. The property was flagged. The judge had already signed the temporary orders. That night there was no shouting match, no begging, just the sound of him pacing the hallway like a trapped animal trying to figure out how the cage appeared around him so fast. I lay in bed, eyes open in the dark. I could hear his steps, but they didn't make me flinch anymore. They didn't control me. This wasn't fear. This was strategy. The following days unfolded like a silent chess match, except he didn't know the board had already changed. Every morning he woke up thinking he could fix it with charm or manipulation, the same tricks he had used for years. But I wasn't the same woman anymore, and the pieces he thought were still his to move were already off the board. He started leaving the house earlier, claiming he was meeting with the travel agent or trying to get everything fixed before our trip. I nodded like I believed him, offering the same soft smile he had always underestimated. Inside, I was documenting everything: the dates, the times, the calls, the lies. I'd already traced the first big withdrawal, a neat $30,000 transfer from our joint savings to a private account under his name, made just 2 hours after he told me he had secured the first payment for the resort. It wasn't even hidden cleverly. He assumed I'd never check. Then came the second withdrawal, $25,000 sent to a brokerage account he opened months earlier, one I didn't even know existed until the private investigator handed me a printed timeline. The third transfer, the one that confirmed everything, didn't go to a travel company at all. It went to a real estate escrow service in Sarasota. And that's when the real story began to reveal itself. He hadn't planned a 2-week vacation. He'd bought a house, not for us. I remember sitting alone in my car in the grocery store parking lot, holding those printed documents, feeling that strange mix of cold fury and sharp clarity. For years, I'd been told I was too emotional, too suspicious, too controlling, and now the evidence sat in my hands, page after page, proving that I wasn't crazy. He was calculated. I started mapping out every step of his lie. He hadn't just told me about a fake trip. He built a whole illusion around it. He sent me emails with fake itineraries. He printed out a fake travel confirmation with a made-up logo. He even showed me photos of a villa he claimed was already ours for the summer. All stolen from a website. But here's the thing about liars who believe they're smarter than everyone else. They leave cracks. And I didn't just find them. I pried them open. The private investigator found the property deed. It was under the name of a woman he'd been seeing for months. Her name appeared right next to his on the document. A house bought with the $70,000 that was supposed to be for our dream vacation. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I sat at my kitchen table, folded the papers neatly, and slid them into the evidence folder. My lawyer told me I had enough to not just file for divorce, but to bury him financially. Florida's marital asset laws worked in my favor. The $70,000 lie wasn't just betrayal, it was leverage. Every night after that, I played the part of the trusting wife. I asked about the trip. I laughed when he told me the flight deals were insane. I kissed him goodnight like I hadn't already planned my escape. The day he told me, just wait till you see the villa. I already had a copy of the deed with his signature on it. I already had screenshots, bank statements, and the investigator's report. I already had my lawyer drafting the papers. I wasn't the one waiting anymore. He was. He just didn't know it. The closer the departure date got, the more elaborate his stories became. He showed me fake seat assignments. He invented delays with the travel agent. He even sent me an email he wrote to himself pretending to be from the airline. It would have been pathetic if it weren't so expensive. And the best part? I never asked questions that would give away what I knew. I let him pile lie on top of lie. Because the taller the tower, the harder it falls. I remember the night I moved the last of my personal savings into a separate account under my name only. It wasn't fear driving me anymore. It was precision. He had turned our marriage into a gamble, and I was done playing fair. By the end of week 3, the trap was fully set. Every cent was accounted for. Every fake document cataloged. Every legal motion ready. He thought he was about to board a plane to a tropical paradise. What he didn't know was that his ticket was one way to a courtroom. I looked at him across the dinner table that night, listening to him talk about our upcoming adventure. His smile was practiced, his confidence unshaken, but I was the only one at that table who knew the game was already over. The next morning, he left before I even woke up, as usual, pretending to rush to confirm the resort. I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the timeline one more time. Every transaction, every lie, every fake itinerary was lined up perfectly. I didn't need to imagine his motives anymore. I had proof, solid, undeniable proof that he had spent the $70,000 on something completely unrelated to our lives together. I called my lawyer while he was gone. Her voice was calm and precise, a perfect counterbalance to the storm I was feeling. I explained the full situation, the transfers, the property deed, the correspondence, and the timeline. She asked questions I had already answered for myself. She confirmed that under Florida law, I could freeze any joint assets and immediately file for divorce citing financial fraud. That day, I spent hours reviewing the evidence packet. Every document was scanned, every statement annotated, every screenshot backed up. I labeled them in chronological order, color-coded for impact. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my freedom, my sanity, and the ability to step out of a marriage built on lies without being crushed by manipulation or intimidation. He returned home later that afternoon, exhausted from his resort meetings. I smiled, pretending to share his excitement about packing and planning. I asked which airport he wanted to fly from, and he rattled off options. I nodded along. He had no idea that every word he spoke was being quietly documented in my legal brief. Over the next few days, I continued to play the part of the unsuspecting wife while tightening the legal net around him. Every update from him was matched with evidence that contradicted it. Every excuse was a new entry in my growing dossier. My investigator even uncovered emails showing he had been in contact with the woman whose name was on the deed for months before he told me about the vacation. It was surreal to watch him operate with such confidence, completely unaware that his entire scheme was collapsing. I realized that the $70,000 wasn't just a number. It was a leverage, a key that unlocked the door to my independence. I would use it to secure not only my financial security, but also the legal affirmation that I no longer had to endure a life built on deception. Finally, the day came to take action. I had transferred the remaining funds into my personal account, finalized the evidence packet with my lawyer, and drafted the documents that would simultaneously freeze his access to assets and begin divorce proceedings. Every detail had been double-checked. Every loophole had been closed. I waited until he left for the day, carrying the facade of the loving husband, heading off to finalize vacation details. I sat alone, breathing slowly, imagining the confrontation that would come later. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. He would arrive home to find the world as he thought he knew it completely upended. That evening, as the sun set, I glanced at the folder containing all the evidence. Photos, bank statements, emails, the deed, investigator notes, everything neatly organized. This wasn't revenge, it was justice and liberation. I had uncovered the truth, documented it meticulously, and now had the power to reclaim my life. And as I heard the car pull into the driveway, I knew the next steps would change everything. The man who had lied to me for weeks, who thought he had complete control, was about to be confronted with the full weight of his deception. I was about to turn the $70,000 lie into the ultimate instrument of my freedom. When he walked through the door, the energy in the house felt different, charged and tense, though he didn't notice it. I calmly greeted him, then motioned for him to sit. On the coffee table lay the folder, the physical manifestation of every lie he had told. I watched him cautiously, pretending to be patient, while internally every heartbeat counted toward the final act of this long, exhausting dance. I explained that the vacation he had described never existed. Every itinerary, every booking, every confirmation he had shown me was fabricated. I presented the bank statements, the emails, the property deed, and the investigator's report. His face changed in stages, from confusion to disbelief, then panic. He tried to interrupt, tried to rationalize, but I held up a hand, insisting he hear everything before reacting. Then I served the legal documents. The divorce petition, the restraining order on joint assets, and a full outline of the $70,000 misuse were all laid before him. His arrogance, the one thing he had relied on to mask his lies, crumbled. He realized that not only had I uncovered his deception, but I had acted in a way that left him with no defense, no leverage, and no time to manipulate the narrative. He attempted to argue, to deflect blame, even tried to convince me that he had intended to repay the money or that the purchase was necessary. Every word he said was met with evidence that contradicted it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply presented the facts. Each page I turned was another nail in the coffin of the life he had attempted to control. By the end of the evening, he was defeated. The realization hit him that the freedom he had tried to deny me was now inevitable. The $70,000 lie that was meant to bind me to him had been transformed into the very means of my liberation. I had turned his manipulation into my power. The following weeks were surreal. The court proceedings were straightforward because I had prepared meticulously. The divorce was granted quickly, citing financial misconduct and fraud. The judge approved the freezing of assets, ensuring that I received restitution and the security to rebuild my life independently. He left, exposed and defeated, while I walked away with clarity, safety, and autonomy. I moved into my new apartment, a space that reflected my independence for the first time. I opened the window, feeling the breeze, imagining the freedom that had once seemed impossible. I knew the marriage was over, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my life and my agency. Even though the betrayal had cut deeply, the liberation was profound. I had used the lie that was meant to control me to forge a future built on truth and self-reliance. Every document, every phone call, every careful investigation had been a step toward reclaiming myself. The $70,000 that he had misused was now the symbolic key that unlocked my independence. The final irony was unmistakable. The lie intended to entrap me had become my instrument of emancipation. I realized that sometimes the very deception meant to enslave a person can be turned into the means of escape if one is meticulous, patient, and unflinchingly determined. The morning the divorce papers were officially filed, I felt a mixture of relief and adrenaline coursing through me. I woke early, already knowing the steps I needed to take, the calls to make, and the documents to deliver. Every detail I had meticulously gathered over weeks. The bank statements, the false itineraries, the investigators' reports, was now in the hands of the court and my lawyer. There was no turning back. When the process server arrived to deliver the documents to him, I stayed in my apartment, pacing quietly, trying to suppress the rush of emotions. I had imagined this moment countless times. The moment he would finally realize the consequences of his deception, the moment his smug confidence would crumble. I knew it would not be immediate, but the first step had been taken. Hours later, I received a call from my lawyer. He had read the reaction: shock, disbelief, attempts to negotiate, even anger. But none of it mattered now. The legal papers had been served, and the timeline I had prepared made any defense impossible. The $70,000 lie, the one thing he had believed would bind me, was now the exact lever that ensured I walked away with everything I needed: security, restitution, and freedom. I spent the day organizing my new life, arranging movers, and contacting financial institutions to secure my accounts. Each action felt like another layer of protection, another guarantee that he could not manipulate or control me further. Even as the sting of betrayal lingered, the empowerment of reclaiming my autonomy was intoxicating. Later that evening, I reviewed all the evidence one last time. The timeline, the bank transfers, the purchase of the property, everything painted a clear picture of his deceit. I could see how meticulously I had documented every step, every lie, and how that diligence had transformed the $70,000 loss into the foundation for my new life. I realized that patience and careful planning had been my greatest allies. The days that followed were filled with court appointments and legal negotiations, but the process moved quickly because I had anticipated every counter-argument. Each interaction reinforced the truth I already knew. The marriage was over, but the life I wanted was finally within reach. I found myself feeling a quiet sense of triumph, not out of spite, but from the clarity and safety I had created for myself. When the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse with a sense of liberation I had never experienced. The $70,000, the lie, the betrayal, they were all behind me. My husband's attempts to manipulate and control had failed entirely. I had turned the situation around, using the deceit as a tool to purchase my freedom and independence. I returned home, unpacked, and looked around my new apartment. Every item, every space felt like a statement of autonomy. I had made choices for myself for the first time in years, without fear or manipulation. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. The lie meant to entrap me had instead created the pathway to my liberation. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, allowing myself to feel the full weight of the freedom I had earned. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also provided clarity. I knew now that sometimes the very actions meant to hurt us can be redirected into our own empowerment if we are strategic, patient, and unwavering. Even as the legal battle and the emotional fallout settled, I felt a sense of calm determination. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my autonomy. The past would not define me, and the $70,000 lie had become a symbol of the power I had to protect myself even against those I had trusted most. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to use the $70,000 lie as the reason for divorce, secretly investigate my husband's financial fraud, and choose to buy my freedom with the evidence I found, because this decision didn't just end her honeymoon early, it cost her the husband she loved, turned our parents against me, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. And I'm sure she won't be inviting me to her next family event this year.